Previously, we discussed the somatic nervous system, which consists two divisions, which are the sensory division and motor division. And in the same way, the autonomic nervous system also consists of the sensory and motor division. But in the case of autonomic nervous system, the motor division is further subdivided into three, which are the sympathetic, parasympathetic, and enteric nervous system. The autonomic nervous system innervates cardiac muscle and smooth muscle, and also innervates different types of glands found inside our body. So that means the autonomic nervous system controls the rate, the beating of the heart, and also controls, for example, the dilation and constriction of our blood vessel. So it's the autonomic nervous system that controls all our involuntary movements, or the movement that we cannot actually control. In the autonomic, we usually have two neurons in our electrical pathway. We have here the preganglionic neuron and postganglionic neuron. On the other hand, autonomic uses acetylcholine as well as, in some cases, epinephrine and norepinephrine. So now, let's discuss the sympathetic and parasympathetic of the autonomic nervous system. Let's begin with the sympathetic case. So let's suppose we're casually walking in the park, and all of a sudden, there's a dog that begins to chase us. Now, if we choose to run away from that dog, or if we choose to fight that dog off, in either case, it's the sympathetic nervous system that actually kicks in. So let's suppose we decided to run away. Now as we begin to run, what begins to happen is more blood begins to pump to our skeletal muscles so that we can run away. And as more blood is being pumped to our muscle, those muscles are basically using more energy, creating more ATP molecules, and they need more oxygen. And so, the rate of our respiration increases as well as the rate of our heart. Now, as we begin to run, we have to see where we're going, and that means our pupils increases. They dilate so that more light gets into our eyes, and we can better see where we're actually running to. So we see that our sympathetic nervous system is the division of autonomic nervous system that is responsible for the fight or flight response. This includes dilating our pupils, increasing the heart, and as well as our breathing rate, and increasing the amount that we sweat. So that's because when we sweat, we're basically expelling the byproduct, our energy. So as we produce more ATP in our muscles, that creates more thermal energy as a byproduct, and to keep our temperature of the body at the same temperature, we have to expel that energy, and we do that by the process of sweating. Now when we're running, we don't have to worry about digestion, because our body basically needs to use the majority of the energy to basically run instead of digest. And so, what happens is that decreases our digestive rate, and at the same time, it inhibits peristalsis, because peristalsis is the movement of our food products through our small intestine for the process of absorption. So when we essentially begin to run, we don't worry about digestion or peristalsis. So the sympathetic nervous system shuts down this process. It increases the rate. So the overall effect of our sympathetic nervous system is to basically increase the blood flow to our heart or cardiac muscle as well as to our skeletal muscles. So the blood vessels that carry the blood to our cardiac skeletal muscles increase in size. They dilate. But the blood vessels that carry the blood to our digestive tract basically decrease in size. They constrict because our rate of activity decreases inside the gastrointestinal system. So now that we know the function of the sympathetic nervous system, let's discuss the pathway of the electrical signal along the neuron inside the sympathetic nervous system. So we have two neurons in our pathway. The first neuron is known as the preganglionic neuron, and the second one is the postganglionic neuron. All preganglionic neurons in the sympathetic nervous system begin in the spinal cord of our body. So the cell body and the dendrites of the preganglionic neuron are found in our spinal cord. When the axon exits in the spinal cord, it always exits from the front side, known as the ventral side. And the axon of the preganglionic neuron is relatively short compared to our axon of the postganglionic neuron. Now, at the first synapse between our preganglionic and the postganglionic cell of the sympathetic nervous system, we use acetylcholine as our neurotransmitter to pass that signal from our preganglionic to our postganglionic cell. Now, when the action potential is carried all the way to the axon terminal of the postganglionic cell at the synapse between our axon terminal and the cell of our effector organ, in this case, we use a different neurotransmitter. We either use epinephrine or norepinephrine. Inside the sympathetic nervous system, we usually have two of these neurons, but there is one exception. The electrical signal that is carried from the spinal cord to our adrenal medulla is carried by only a single neuron, by one preganglionic neuron. So, the preganglionic neuron basically carries that electrical signal all the way to our adrenal medulla without using the postganglionic neuron. And our neurotransmitter in that case is still acetylcholine. So now, let's move on to our parasympathetic nervous system. So in many different ways, the parasympathetic nervous system reverses these effects. So let's suppose we just ate and then we sit down watching TV. So as we are watching our television, we're not using our muscles as much. So that means we do not have to worry about producing ATP to move our muscles. So what the parasympathetic system does is it basically decreases the rate of the heart and the respiration rate. Thus, the parasympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system is responsible for the rest and digest activities. This means it increases the flow of blood to our digestive organs and excretory system. So that means the blood vessels carrying blood to our digestive organs increases in size. They dilate. While our blood vessel that carry our blood to our skeletal tissue decreases in size. And so, we have a decrease in blood flow because we don't have to worry about moving our arms or legs. We're basically sitting down watching TV. So this is what the parasympathetic nervous system does. Now let's discuss the pathway in the parasympathetic case. As I've said earlier about the sympathetic nervous system, our preganglionic neuron always begins in our spinal cord. While in the case of the parasympathetic, it can begin in the spinal cord or in the brain. So the cell body begins in our brain or spinal cord, and now the axon is relatively long. So the axon is long compared to the axon of the postganglionic cell. So we still have here the preganglionic cell that synapses with the postganglionic cell, and in this case, our neurotransmitter is also acetylcholine. Let's now discuss the enteric nervous system. It's very important to know that gastrointestinal system has its own nervous system, which is called the enteric nervous system. Many neurophysiologists call it the second brain because it can and does function autonomously, but it also communicates with the central nervous system through the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system, meaning that it is also influenced by the central nervous system. The principal components of the enteric nervous system are two networks or plexuses of neurons, both of which are embedded in the wall of the digestive tract and extend from esophagus to anus. The first network is the myenteric plexus, which is also called the Urbach's plexus, and the second is called submucosal plexus, or also called the Meissner's plexus. Talking about the localization of these plexuses, first we can see here the section of the small intestine, somewhere between the duodenum and ileum. And then we'll see here exactly these plexuses are located in the wall of the gastrointestinal tract. And as we already know, like the rest of the gastrointestinal tract, the small intestines are made up of 4 layers of tissue. So the mucosa forms the innate layer of a tissue and is specialized for the absorption of the nutrients. Deep to the mucosa is the submucosal layer that provides blood vessels and nerves to support the mucosa on the surface. The 2 layers of the smooth muscles in inner circular layer and longitudinal muscular layer makes the muscularis externa. Finally, the serosa forms the outermost layer epithelial tissue. As I already said, the principal components of the enteric nervous system are 2 networks or plexuses of neurons. The first one is the myenteric plexus, which is located between the longitudinal and circular layers of muscles in the muscularis externa here. And as I already said, it is a network of neurons looking like this. The second plexus is called submucosal plexus, and as its name implies, it varies in the submucosa over here. So in general, the enteric nervous system consists of some 100 million neurons. About the function of these plexuses, I would say that myenteric plexus increases the velocity and intensity contractions. This plexus is concerned or controls digestive tract motility. As for submucosal plexus, it is more involved with local conditions and controls local secretion and the blood flow to the submucosal, which is of course determines absorption. Also, it controls local muscle movements.